Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, the big news out of the football world, Alex Smith traded for Kendall Fuller in a third-round pick, going to the Redskins. What do you make of the move?
It's really interesting. I would not have expected Washington to be the team that was going to go after Alex Smith. It means that they're giving up on the idea of trying to sign Kirk Cousins long-term.
I don't think they ever really wanted to do that. I think
clearly
they
they've
never
been putting it off for
that,
2
right?
years, man. I mean, they've...
So I think that they came in and they basically think that they got the same quarterback for cheaper. That he'll play for closer to $20 million than $30 million. But they think that he's the same guy. I might disagree, but I think that's their rationale.
Well, I disagree for a couple of reasons. First of all, the new guy is 4 years older than the other guy. Okay, so that's one thing. Statistically, I mean, Cousins was average this year once he no longer had the weapons that he had in past years. Smith was 10th, but of course that's like in DVOA, 9th in DYAR, but of course that's his best season, and he was so hot at the start of the year, and it kind of calmed down as the year went along.
Like the Atlanta Falcons, I don't think we'll expect him to be as good next year as he was this year.
Right, especially considering the age. Not every quarterback, right? He's 34. Not every quarterback plays into his late 30s. Not every quarterback is Tom Brady. The fact that they traded a third-round pick and Kendall Fuller was awesome this year. Now,
excellent player.
Cornerback coverage stats are very inconsistent. Cornerback are very inconsistent from year to year, whether you're using stats or just subjective anecdotes. And he was a slot corner, right? So, some of these numbers are going to be a little artificially inflated. But number 2 in success rate, number 8 in yards per pass. Kendall Fuller was really good this year. And I think there's sort of an assumption that the Redskins will get the third-round pick back because by allowing Cousins to leave, they're going to get a compensatory pick. But I don't know if the compensatory pick is going to be as high as people expect because compensatory pick is determined by free agent in and free agent out, not just free agent out. And if Washington signs some free agents, and let's be honest, they will because they're Washington and that's what they do, then they're not going to be at the top of the compensatory draft pick equation, and they're probably not going to get a third. They might get like a fifth.
So I think you bring up a really interesting point there. So if they were to, if he's the only person that they lost in free agency and they didn't bring anybody in, yes, I think he would, just based on the amount of money he's going to make, be a third round compensatory pick for them. But remember, that's all the way at the end of the third round. And like you say, they're kind of tying their own hands in terms of signing players. Hey, maybe that's a good thing for the Washington Redskins to have their hands tied in terms of signing guys.
I also think that the Chiefs are really fascinating now for next year because that defense was a wreck this year. But you're going to get Dee Ford back from injury. You're going to get Eric Berry back from injury. Now you add Kendall Fuller. But the offense, it has to take a step back with a guy who's never played before. It's very unlikely. Mahomes is a very different kind of quarterback. It's very unlikely he's going to be as good as a first-year starter as what Alex Smith gave them this year. So I think what happens to the Chiefs next year is kind of fascinating. If the defense doesn't improve with those guys coming back, that could be a team that picks in the top 10 of the 2019 draft, to be honest. But if Mahomes is surprisingly good in his first year as a starter and those defensive guys come back and get it together, that could be a serious contender. The Chiefs become really, really interesting.
So I'll back up with some of what you were saying about Kendall Fuller before. He played 448 pass snaps this year. So that's a lot. That's a full season, even though he's a nickel guy. The highest numbers in the league you'll see are in the high 500s. Maybe you'll see a guy with 600 pass snaps on a defense that faces a lot of passing. His numbers, though, are really, really ridiculous. When he's targeted on the 59 times he was targeted on those 448 snaps, 29 completions, 290 yards, 1 touchdown, and 4 interceptions against. So just to put that into a little bit more context, we have him as the 9th best quarterback rating against in the league. I know we don't like that for individual players all the time, but it's pretty amazing that his quarterback rating against was 41 when literally throwing the ball into the ground gets you to, what did we say that is, 38? Quarterbacks completed 49% of their passes against him, 4.9 yards per attempt, and just 18 yards per game with those 4 interceptions. Right.
And the success rate shows that they weren't getting short completions in front of him, right? Both the completion rate and the success rate show. Even though he's a nickel corner, it's not like they were completing 5-yard passes in front of him on 3rd and 4. Like he was stopping teams from converting.
Yep, 10 yards per completion, which is pretty much as good as it gets in the league. Really, really interesting trade there. Obviously, I think they're going to have to pay him in a year. Fun little anecdote. Back when I was scouting at Virginia Tech, probably in 2012 or 13, when Kyle Fuller was a senior, we all took notice of Kendall Fuller, his younger brother, the youngest of the 4 Fuller brothers, and he's the best out of all of them. I think if you really pushed Kyle, he'd even tell you that. Kendall's just an unbelievable athlete, really versatile. And I think that's going to be a big pickup there.
Kyle, by the way, 5th in success rate, 12th in yards per pass this year, and was close to the league lead in targets. So they kept throwing at him and he kept stopping it. So really good season for the Fuller brothers. And now this sets up the big Fuller brothers Super Bowl, Chicago versus Kansas City down the line, Fuller versus Fuller for all of the Fuller marbles.
It sounds like a Fuller House episode. All right. Zing. Well, anyway, enough of that trade.
This year's Super Bowl, fewer Fullers are featured.
Fewer Fullers. Any Fullers in the Super Bowl?
I believe there are no Fullers in this year's Super Bowl.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's get to breaking down the matchup. Aaron, what does DVOA have to tell us about this matchup?
The Patriots come out a little bit higher, whether you're talking about the weighted DVOA that goes through the playoffs. The Patriots are number 1. The Eagles are number 2. When you talk about DVOA during the regular season, the Eagles are a little bit higher, but of course, you have to adjust for Foles. And I think that people are overreacting to Foles' performance in the NFC Championship game in the same way that they overreacted to Foles' performance against the Raiders in Week 16. He is neither the quarterback that we saw in the NFC Championship game, nor the awful quarterback that we saw against the Raiders. He's somewhere in between. But I think that the drop from Wentz to him is enough to mean that even in the regular season as a total, even considering what the Patriots did in the first 4 weeks of the season, that the Patriots would be a little bit higher than the Eagles. So the line of Patriots -4 or -4.5 seems pretty accurate to me.
So one thing that popped into my mind as you were saying all that was that the Eagles and Nick Foles actually, as much as he's been 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions guy, and then he has that terrible game like you're talking about, then he has the great game. I kind of think of him as a fairly consistent kind of he is what he is kind of a player. There's all this talk now about what kind of a contract he's going to get coming into the offseason, whether he wins the Super Bowl, loses the Super Bowl. And I think like you indicate, like people are going to react one way or another based on how he plays and kind of overpay or underpay accordingly. I think Foles kind of is what he is. He, likes to throw the screen pass. He'll do a lot of that spread stuff and kind of run the offense, but he's not a guy that you're going to, put it on his shoulders to go win the game. And I think that, whether or not the Eagles win, I don't know if it'll be Nick Foles who makes that decision. I think it'll probably have more to do with their running game and their defense.
It's interesting to note that we talk a lot about the Patriots as a team that changes what they do in order to attack what the other team does badly.
Right.
And the Eagles have done that in the playoffs. In the first playoff game, Foles ran an offense that was almost entirely short passes based on yards after the catch. Against the Vikings, it was a lot of deep passes. He hit some deep passes. Part of that was he hit them. I mean, you got to give the guy credit. But also guys were schemed open. A flea flicker, a lot of like double moves to specifically beat Minnesota's man coverage. So the offense was built very differently against the Vikings to take advantage of what they thought were the Vikings' weaknesses and what I think they were right about, clearly, because it worked. So you got to give the Eagles credit for that their offense is going to be designed to – they're not a team that's going to go out and do their thing. I think they're going to try to attack what they see as the Patriots' weaknesses. Of course, part of the question of what the Patriots' weaknesses are, because are the Patriots the defense we've seen over the whole season or just the defense we've seen over the last few weeks? Do we count the first few weeks of the season? Do we not count the first few weeks of the season? And so on.
Just like with the Eagles, you say, do we count the Carson Wentz time or do we just look at the Nick Foles kind of 4-game sample size?
Right.
So anyway, now that we've muddied it all up, let's take a look and let's start off with when the Patriots have the ball. And one of the matchups that I always love looking into is how the quarterback will perform against various coverages and what the defense likes to do in coverage and how good they are at it. And as we've talked about kind of throughout the later part of the season, Tom Brady has been better against the zone coverage schemes than against the man schemes. And he's also been better against cover 3 than against cover 1 when teams have decided to go single high against him. So cover 3 and cover 4 has been a field day for Tom Brady. He loves to see cover 2. The man coverage 2 and the cover 1 stuff is where he's been at his worst. So how does that tie into what the Eagles do? The Eagles have been very good in man this year. They've allowed just 51% completions and 6 yards per attempt. Cover 1, especially, they've been outstanding, just 72.4 quarterback rating against. But they've struggled when they've gone to the cover 2 and the cover 4 schemes where their quarterback rating against drops down to 97, which is 22nd in the NFL. So I'd expect the Eagles to play a lot of man, and I'd expect them to mix in some cover 3 with their cover 1. They're probably their 2 primary coverages, but that cover 3 is going to be strength on strength. They're very good in the cover 3, and Tom Brady is very good against it. And that cover 1, I think, is really going to be, as long as they're mixing it up and coming back to that, I think that's their best route to beating Tom Brady. And like we've talked about before, that'll mean that Gronk will become the focal point, assuming that he's healthy and Gronk.
Right. I pointed this out on Twitter, but after on the last podcast, you pointed out the way Brady destroys cover 4 and that the Jaguars shouldn't go into it at the end of the game if they have a lead. What did the Jaguars do?
Play.
They went into it at the end of the game with the lead, and on the 3rd and 18 catch by Amendola, what were the Jaguars in? Cover 4.
I get it. You want to defend the deep stuff and all that kind of stuff, but come on, guys.
Yeah. Did you not see on film that he kills that? What can I tell you? So the Eagles hopefully have seen on film that he kills that. And I'm with you about Gronk. I mean, if you look at DVOA versus types of receivers, Philadelphia 7th against wide receivers, 1st up against number 1s. They do allow a lot of passes to number 1s, but efficiency-wise, they're very good. Number 1 DVOA in the league against number 2s, but 17th against tight ends and 22nd against others, which means slot, which probably means Danny Amendola. So I think Gronk is the killer in this game. Whether they play cover 1 or cover 3, nobody has figured out how to cover Gronk. Cover 3 too often puts a linebacker on him. That is just a massive mismatch. And in cover 1, nobody can cover him man-to-man. So, and the only guy we thought might be able to was Harrison Smith, and Harrison Smith is not in this game. So, numbers, the Gronk is going to, I think, have a big game. And then I would watch for Amendola because the outside cornerbacks for the Eagles are a lot better than what they've got going in the slot.
So on the Gronk point, obviously the Jaguars figured out a way not to cover Gronk, but a way to get him out of the game, certainly. But in this game, with him back healthy, what the Jaguars had been doing was a lot of Tayshaun Gibson matching up on him. So kind of one of these guys that with a very good reputation for being a good man-to-man coverage safety. That guy for the Eagles is definitely Malcolm Jenkins, a guy that I'm very familiar with. We drafted him out of Ohio State when I was in New Orleans. And he's a guy that can guard the slot. He can guard the outside, has some positional flexibility back there. So he's a nice matchup against Gronk, obviously gives up size against him like anybody else. But we took a little look. Dan DiGiuseppe did some good research, and he just pointed out the Eagles and safeties and their rating against various tight ends and slot players. And Jenkins gave up an 88 passer rating. Bradham gave up a 90 passer rating. But a couple of interesting guys there. Kendricks was down at just 63. So that could be a product of the matchups that he had, but he was a little bit more effective lining up against these guys. And then Corey Graham, who's a backup safety, has played a much larger role in the playoffs than the regular season. So he played 38% of snaps against the Falcons and 52 against the Vikings, and his regular season playtime percentages were in the teens and 20s. So look out for Corey Graham. He's also a 85 quarterback rating against these inside targets. So he could be somebody that plays a role in there as well.
Yeah, I it's interesting to see. And I've seen some numbers saying that the Eagles give up passes to running backs a lot. The DVOA numbers suggest that they don't. Philadelphia, was 10th in DVOA against passes to running backs. They weren't particularly high in the yards allowed per game in passes to running backs. But what's interesting is the types of running backs that they gave up yardage to. The top 3 running backs in yardage against the Eagles in the receiving game this year were the kind of guys who would motion out wide. They're not the main back. They're the back that comes in on third downs and catches passes. They got absolutely boiled alive by Chris Thompson from Washington. In 2 games, he caught 9 of 10 passes for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. They gave up 65 yards in a game to Andre Ellington, and they gave up 56 yards in one game to Christian McCaffrey. They did pretty well against Shane Vereen. But for the most part, the running backs that they controlled in the receiving game were when you have the main running back who also catches passes sometimes, right? They stopped Carlos Hyde. They stopped Rob Kelly. They stopped Perkins and Melvin Gordon and John Stewart and Marshawn Lynch. So who are the types of running backs that the Patriots are going to be throwing to? Not Mike Gillislee, and maybe not even Dion Lewis. It's going to be James White split out wide, and that is the kind of running back in the passing game, like Chris Thompson, that the Eagles had a lot of problems with.
So unlike Chris Thompson, who I'd be afraid of carrying the ball as well, I think the Eagles shouldn't be afraid of James White if he's the solo running back in the game. And if they see that, you almost want to treat him like a receiver and dare the Patriots to hand him the ball. Because if they start to get into, their big personnel against that stuff, then I think you're right. I think that could be a killer matchup for them. Really interesting stuff there.
What do you think? Do you have numbers about the Patriots? We talked a lot with the Jaguars about how the Patriots run 21-12 so much more often than other teams do. Do you have numbers about that? And with the Eagles defense, because the Jaguars defense struggled against that. How's the Eagles defense?
Right. So like you mentioned, Brady has the most passes out of 2 wide receiver sets. So either 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, or 21 personnel. Those 2 wide receiver sets, he has 220 pass attempts, and there was only one other quarterback who had 170. And even with all that usage, he was still second in efficiency. Only Marcus Mariota had a higher rating in 2 wide receiver sets, and Brady's 114 rating was not far off. He had more than 400 more yards of passing in 2 wide receiver sets than the next highest quarterback. So how did the Eagles match up? Pretty well. The Eagles are second in the NFL in rating against when facing 2 wide receiver sets. Only the Saints were stronger against 12 and 21 personnel, as the Eagles allowed just a 72 rating and under 6.4 yards per attempt. Meanwhile, they dropped down to 10th in defending the pass against 11 personnel, or 3 wide receiver sets. So maybe we see the Patriots break some trends and get into some different stuff personnel-wise than a lot of their 21 and 12. In the run game as well, a lot of the same stuff. Patriots have had a lot of success, 4.8 yards per attempt with 2 wide receivers on the field. But again, the Eagles were 5th in the NFL in defending the run against those personnel groups, giving up 3.3 yards per attempt. So then again, they gave up more than 4.3 yards per attempt against 3 wide receiver sets, but still that's the 4th lowest number in the league. So really, at the end of the day, I think what it means is I think the Patriots are going to come out throwing. I think regardless of the personnel groupings, I don't think it's a great matchup for them running the ball, especially early, at least early in the game. Things change when you get ahead. But if we do see the Patriots start to attack them out of different personnel groupings, I would expect to see more of that 11 stuff, more of the 3 wide receiver formations out there than what we've typically seen and what we saw a lot of in the past couple games.
Of course, there'll probably be a lot of talk about pressure, right? Because going into Jacksonville, all the talk was this is a defense that can pressure with just the front 4. To beat Brady, you have to pressure with just the front 4. Well, guess what? The Eagles are also a defense that can pressure with just the front 4 because they're near the top of the league in pressure rate. Even though they weren't near the top of the league, they're only 19th in adjusted sack rate. The pressure rate was phenomenal. So they're going to try to pressure Brady. But as I think I said a couple weeks ago, it's really interesting. Unlike in past years, Brady was not better when you blitzed him this year. He actually was better when you only brought 4. And he's, of course, the best quarterback in the league under pressure this year. So even if you're only bringing 4 guys against him, he played really well this year. The one thing I will note is that the Eagles rushed 4 more than almost any other team, like Jacksonville. Jacksonville was one of the two teams that rushed four more often than the Eagles did. When they blitzed, they were the only team in the league that sent 6 guys almost as often as they sent 5 guys. And their yards per pass go up with 5 pass rushers, but down with 6. So basically, Jim Schwartz is definitely a guy who wants to pick his spots with the blitz. And I think that that's the right way to go up against Brady. Don't blitz a lot. Don't never blitz. Pick your spots. And when the Jacksonville blitzed, they only blitzed 3 times in that game, in the AFC Championship game, but 2 of their blitzes were 2nd and 10 and 3rd and 10 in the fourth quarter with 6 minutes left. That was not a 3 and out because the Patriots got a DPI on the first play, but it was DPI plus 3 and out where the Patriots had to punt with 6 minutes left, even though they were losing. So the blitzes from the Jacksonville, the rare times they did blitz, did work on Brady in that game.
Just a little tidbit to add on there. I agree with everything you said. The Eagles are in the middle of the pack in sacks, but 3 of the top 20 defensive linemen in pressure rate. Chris Long is 3rd, Derek Barnett is 17th, and Vinny Curry was 20th this year. So they've got guys that can come in there and get home. And like you're saying, whether it's rushing 4, 5, or 6, they've got to mix it up and they've got to find a way to get the receivers off their routes and get to Brady, throw off their timing. That's the only way we've seen it happen.
This is why there's a lot of talk on Boston Sports Radio about the Patriots going no huddle a lot in this game, because Jim Schwartz loves to have multiple defensive linemen and he loves to rotate them. The names you just gave include 2 guys who are technically backups. Chris Long and Vinny Curry are the 3rd and 4th defensive ends behind Barnett and Brandon Graham. If you go no huddle, you prevent the Eagles from bringing Chris Long and Vinny Curry onto the field in passing situations. You force them to get their main defensive line tired out. They can't be rotating Bo Allen with Tommy Jernigan.
Right.
If you go no huddle, they can't be rotating Chris Long with Brandon Graham if you go no huddle. So there's a lot of feeling around Boston. We're going to see a lot of no huddle from the Patriots to keep the Eagles from rotating their defensive line.
And just to tie that kind of all back around together, a lot of times when a team's going no huddle on offense, they like to do that out of their 11 personnel group with just 1 running back and 1 tight end on the field, and give you a lot of that flexibility. As we were mentioning before, we might expect to see the Patriots do a little bit more of that than they've done the rest of the season, because the Eagles have been a little bit more susceptible against 11 than they have against the 21 and 12 personnel groups. So
right. Although the Patriots have no problem with going no huddle out of 21 because they'll just put James White out wide. They'll just put James Devlin out wide.
Right. The flexibility they have on the roster, is helpful there.
Yep.
One more matchup to take a look at. We looked at run schemes and how different teams have matched up in terms of run schemes this year. The Patriots offense and the Eagles defense, both very good on zone runs. So the Patriots, 4 yards per attempt on zone runs, and the Eagles only give up under 3 yards per attempt. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Eagles have shown a little bit of a chink in their armor against pull runs. 5.2 yards per carry is 27th in the league against gap scheme runs with pullers there. The Patriots are just middle of the pack, 4.9 yards per attempt, 16th in the NFL running those plays. If the Patriots do decide to put the ball on the ground, which I wouldn't expect so much of it, except maybe in the second half if they have a lead, I would think that pull scheme stuff, that gap power football is the direction that we would expect the Patriots to go in.
I will say it's really interesting. I went and looked at how the Patriots ran the ball against the best run defenses on their schedule. They played 6 games against teams that were in the top dozen of run defense DVOA. That's the Texans, the Panthers, the Broncos, the Titans in the playoffs, and 2 games against the Jets. They averaged 3.94 yards per carry against those teams. The season average against those 5 teams was 3.94 yards per carry. The only difference is the Patriots averaged 3.94 yards per carry with an average of 7.5 yards to go, while all those teams' other opponents averaged 3.94 yards per carry with an average of 8.5 yards to go. So even though they averaged the same amount, the Patriots were more efficient than average against these top run defenses.
Right. Interesting note there. A couple other notes before we move on to the other side of the ball. Turnovers is something to keep an eye on. Philadelphia was 4th in takeaways this year with 31, and that doesn't include a league-leading 13 dropped interceptions. They could have had 13 more. Meanwhile, New England committed the second fewest turnovers, 12, with only 5 dropped interceptions. So something's got to give there. Will the Eagles be able to turn the Patriots over? And then I look at a couple of Tom Brady notes. Tom Brady had an 120 pass rating when targeting a receiver on a fly route this year, which was second amongst quarterbacks with at least 10 attempts. Meanwhile, the Eagles against fly routes allowed a league low 3.6 quarterback rating. So that's 2 for 22 for 76 yards and 2 interceptions on fly routes. Really unbelievable stuff there. So it'd be tough for Brady to go downfield. That said, if he does go down the field, look for Cooks down the left sideline. He's been excellent throwing deep sidelines, 13 yards per attempt both ways. And the Eagles have allowed 11.7 yards per attempt down the left sideline. That's Darby, compared to 4.7 yards per attempt down the right sideline. That's Mills. So if Brady's going to take his shots, look for them on the left outside to Cooks over there when he's lined up against Darby.
Right. On to when the Eagles have the ball. I mean, I think if people are listening to this podcast, it's not going to surprise them. We have a lot more to say about when the Patriots have the ball, because if we're doing stat analysis here, it's a lot easier to do stat analysis on Tom Brady playing an entire season than on Nick Foles essentially playing 4 games. If you take out the Week 17 game that was mostly Nate Sudfeld, we're basically talking 2 regular season games and 2 postseason games. And so a lot of the sort of trend type stuff for Nick Foles is going to be pretty small sample size. And with the Patriots defense, there's the whole question of, how valuable are certain defensive stats for the Patriots if they were such a different defense over the first quarter of the season. And while they still gave up a lot of yards, after the first 4 weeks of the season, right, the points dropped dramatically. The red zone performance became incredible. And it's just been a very different defense since the first month of the season.
So one thing that we can say, and this is more anecdotal based on what we've seen from Foles recently, on the first play of both Eagles playoff games. The first game against the Falcons and the second play game against the Vikings, the Eagles went with a deep ball to Torrey Smith. So the defenses on these plays had 5 DBs, and they were both playing cover 1. And Foles recognized this, saw the single high safety, and took the deep shot. And also, both plays came with misdirection. On the Falcons deep ball, it was a play action attempt. On the Vikings deep ball, it was a fake screen pass. If you've got your prop bets that you're looking at for what the Eagles might do on their first drive of the game, if these last 2 games are any indication, they took some deep shots to try to free up some space in front of the Nick Foles and the run game and the screen passing game, taking some deep shots to get some room. So that could be something that we see. Again, like we said, small sample size with Nick Foles, but that's something that they've shown on the last 2 games.
It's interesting because the Patriots play, they're pretty much a single high team. There are not a lot of defenses that played more man than the Patriots this year. So if the numbers from SIS have Foles is better against man than against zone, I believe, correct?
Yes, we have him. So we have Foles at his best against cover 1 and at his worst against cover 3. So cover 1 being a man scheme, 1 single high safety, whereas the cover 3 deep guys, 4 guys underneath, generally guarding under there. We looked at that. Foles at his best against cover 1 and worst against cover 3. And that compares to the Patriots, who are at their worst in cover 1. So for the Patriots' sake, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of that matchup. If they go into the cover 1 themselves, that plays into Foles' hands and what he likes to do.
But they play that the most. So it's interesting. This is sort of a challenge to the Patriots. Do you want to do the thing you do most, or do you want to do the thing that the other team struggles against? Right? With the Patriots, it's usually you want to do the thing that the other team struggles against. Will they do that? Will they go to more zone and less man in this game?
So I expect to see that cover 3, because also when you think about some of the tactics going on here, the Eagles like to be a zone, a screen team. They like to throw a lot of screen passes, especially in the Nick Foles version of the offense. And the cover 3, having these linebackers spread out all across the field, really flooding those short zones, I think would seem to be a good strategy against this offense. So I'd expect to see a lot of that. Also, the Patriots have the second worst passer rating against running backs this year. So look out for Corey Clement, especially, again, if the Patriots hang out in that man. If they hang out in that man, it's a little bit easier to find some room to shake there. If you've got all these guys drop back, 7 guys in cover 3, and they're all facing the running back, taking the pass out of the backfield, it's more difficult, especially to get chunk plays.
Now, there's some really interesting weekly trends in this matchup. I found it surprising when one of our competitors named the Philadelphia Eagles as the best offensive line in the league, because I knew that pressure rate wise, as far as offensive pressure allowed by the SIS charting for the full regular season, the Eagles were 29th, right, in the offensive line. And as far as the offensive line adjusted line yards, the Philadelphia offensive line was 22nd. Well, I went and we looked at pressure rate by week and found some really shocking numbers, because you think of pressure rate as being less influenced by the quarterback than sack rate. But for the first 7 weeks of the season, when Jason Peters was still healthy at left tackle, the Eagles allowed pressure on 39.4% of pass plays, which would have led the league for the full season. Peters goes out. Vaitai becomes the left tackle. For the next few weeks, they're up to 42.5% of pass plays, which is insane. Then Foles comes in. And when you look at weeks 15 to 20, so that includes Nate Sudfeld and it includes the 2 playoff games, the pressure rate that the Eagles are allowing has dropped dramatically to 31.5%, which would be average. So did Wentz run himself into all that pressure? Is it something in his style that leads to more pass pressure than what they get with Nick Foles, or perhaps the way that they have changed the offense and put in all those RPOs for Foles where he gets rid of the ball quickly so that opponents don't have the time to pressure him? I think it's an interesting statement about what goes into pressure rate besides just the performance of an offensive line.
Right. It's definitely a combination of both. It's a combination of the style of offense they're running and a combination of the fact that Wentz likes to hold the ball a little more. And so that's going to end up being that you're going to register more hurries that way. 2 things that this makes me think that really don't have that much to do with the game, but a kind of the more interesting aspect of kind of unpacking that, removing Jason Peters. Okay, they're 3% worse, but then all of a sudden you switch Wentz for Foles and they change by 10% in the other direction. One thing that I think is we really, I think, have underestimated how much pressures, not just sacks, but also pressures are tied to the quarterback. And that's something before we did research a few years ago, we all had this thought that sacks were more of an offensive line thing than a quarterback thing. And then we learned, well, actually, they're really a quarterback thing even more than they are an offensive line thing. And it looks like same thing with pressure rate. So we'll have to follow up with more research on that. The other side of that I look at is just blown blocks and the blown blocks against that we talked about the other day. And we might find, especially if we can dig into this research in the offseason, that the blown block stats that we record, which is often a corollary to a pressure or a sack, might do a better job of really getting down to the core of offensive line play and defensive line play, because we can kind of get rid of a lot of the sacks that are the quarterback just holding the ball, getting himself into trouble, or pressures that come from that same sort of thing. So much more research to be done on that front in the future. But I think if anything, going into the game, it just makes me kind of raise an eyebrow and be a little bit of skeptical towards the way people like to read into pressure stats.
Right. And I will say, though, that the Patriots defense was near the bottom of the league in pressure. I think that the 8 sacks or whatever that they got against Tennessee was just not going to happen again. They led the league, I think, in sacks that were coverage sacks or failed scrambles. So they tend to win with coverage, not with pass rush. And I don't see that changing in this game, no matter what our stats say about the Eagles' offensive line.
Yep. I'd expect to see the Patriots sit back in that cover 3 like we talked about before.
The other thing that's really interesting is as far as looking at weekly stats, we know that the Patriots' run defense has been really bad all season, 30th in run defense DVOA, would seem to indicate that a heavy run game plan would be good here. Except that was supposed to be the strategy for Tennessee and Jacksonville, and it didn't work for them. So it turns out that the Patriots have played all of these run-heavy teams over the last few weeks. They suddenly switched into playing a lot of bear front, right? The kind of front that was in the 46 defense where you have like the nose tackle up on the nose, and then you would have the 2 defensive ends kind of heads up on the 2 tackles. They've been playing kind of a 3-3-5 type defense and concentrated on stopping the run. And in the last 4 games, the Patriots have a run defense of minus 23.6%, which would have ranked second behind Arizona during the regular season. They've gone from allowing 5.1 yards per carry through week 15 to 3.3 yards per carry in the last 4 games against 4 teams that wanted to be really run heavy. Meanwhile, the Eagles' running game has declined about the same time, tied to the replacement of Wentz with Foles. So teams know more runs are coming, run pass options. They're not as afraid of Foles going downfield, even though he did it against Minnesota last week. So the Eagles' running game offense has dropped significantly. So I think if they come out and try to have a run-heavy game plan, the Patriots are going to be prepared for that, and they're going to stop it.
Right. So we always say the Patriots want to make you play left-handed, and everything about this seems to say that the Patriots would load up like they've been loading up the past couple of weeks, trying to stop the run game and force Nick Foles to beat them, of course. But it's really hard to explain just how that split has gone because, I like to divide out zone runs against runs with pulling scheme on it. And the Eagles were great running the ball kind of regardless, but especially on those pull schemes this year, 5.6 yards per attempt was 7th. And on the other end of that, the Patriots were really awful against those gap schemes, 5.76 yards per attempt allowed. So, if you're thinking more than 5.5 yards per carry on both sides of the equation in one of those runs, you'd think that would be effective. But the other side of that's going to be, that the Patriots are going to drop 8 guys into the box. They're going to mix up their fronts and try to confuse the Eagles offensive line. Well, maybe it will come back. I said it wouldn't come back to Nick Foles. Maybe it will be. I'm sure Belichick would like it to be, can Nick Foles beat him? I'd give him a better chance than Blake Bortles. But, I'd rather, if I'm Belichick, I'd rather see him than Jay Ajayi and LeGarrette Blount.
I will say I give him a better chance in part because we've seen it done, because he did it against Minnesota. The Minnesota defensive game plan was a lot of, can Nick Foles beat us? Well, guess what? You bet your ass he did. He beat you. Yeah. You dared him to beat you, and he beat the hell out of you. So this podcast may contain explicit content about Nick Foles. So he'll have a shot. That's why I'm not expecting a blowout. Every Patriots Super Bowl seems close, and I don't see this being an exception. Right? I mean, the Patriots they play close games. They don't seem to blow out opponents. But when it comes to the end of the game, as much as we say Nick Foles could possibly do it if he has to, who do you expect to make the big last comeback? Tom Brady or Nick Foles? The answer is Tom Brady. And so that's why you have to favor the Patriots in this game.
And that's also why they play the game.
Yes. No matter who you favor. I mean, I think we have the Patriots winning, 58% of the time? That's actually not a lot. It's not a huge upset for the Eagles to win this game. If the Eagles win this game, it is not an upset along the lines of Super Bowl 42. It's not an upset even along the lines of Super Bowl 46. It's maybe not even be as big as it might not even be as big of an upset as it would have been if the Falcons had pulled off the Super Bowl last year. Sort of depends on how much you value Nick Foles. But during the regular season, until Nick Foles became the quarterback, the Eagles were the number 1 or number 2 team in the league. There is a ton of talent on this team, and we shouldn't forget that defense has a ton of talent on it. Good receivers. The offensive line, I'm not quite sure what to believe because the stats disagree with conventional wisdom. We know the center is good.
The right tackle as well. A big fan of that, Lane Johnson.
Yes, the right tackle, absolutely. Yes. It's very clear offensive line weaknesses. If you want to overload blitz, you go up against the left side of the Eagles line with Vaitai and the right side of the Patriots line with Cam Fleming. Each line has one very clear tackle weakness.
And each head coach and each offensive coordinator, I should say, knows there's one guy on their offensive line that they've got to give help. That's what we've seen for the past few weeks. I think we'd expect to see more of that. Fascinating matchup, how it breaks down.
And of course, that brings me to the other reason to sort of favor the Patriots is, Doug Peterson. I love how aggressive he is on 4th downs. That's wonderful. But you just know he's from that Andy Reid family of coaches. We saw him call a Kansas City comeback drive a couple years ago in the playoffs that just took forever. I worry about, if it gets to be a close game, I worry about clock management from Doug Peterson in a way that I do not worry about clock management from Bill Belichick.
Well, we have two of the more analytically inclined teams playing in the Super Bowl. So
no doubt,
I'm sure everybody listening 40 minutes in is a firm believer in analytics in our crowd. But if you had any doubts about that, there's that little anecdote for you. But the Eagles, theoretically, they put a lot into this, their game decision-making strategy. Hopefully they've figured it out and they've put in some sort of a system, because I'm with you. I was alarmed with what I saw a couple weeks ago, but hey, at the same time, the Malcolm Butler Super Bowl, I was alarmed with the way that Belichick managed the time in that situation. So
this is true. Yes, absolutely. He made some time management mistakes at the end of Super Bowl 49. That's true. So I've already said, basically, I favor the Patriots. People know I'm a Patriots fan. They know that our site is picking the Patriots. What's your pick? Who do you favor?
Well, I think that the Patriots are rightly favored. I think, like you said, if you're setting a line on this game, at some point it's Brady against Foles, and you got to give the edge to the Patriots. That say, if you're going to give me the +4, I'll take the Eagles all day. I'm happy to take the points on a neutral field in this one. And I do think that they've been the stronger team at the other positions throughout the year. I like the way the run matchup works out for them. They can run a lot of that pull stuff. I think they can spread the Patriots out in 11 personnel and and try to prevent the Patriots from loading the box schematically. And then really force the Patriots to tip their hands by spreading them out and going where the men aren't.
I'll tell you what I love most would be 4.5, because so many games end up 3 and 4, and so many Patriots games and Patriots Super Bowls end up 3 and 4. I would love the Eagles +4.5.
Okay. What about at 4? Would you does that
at 4? I would probably still take the Eagles, but with less with the feeling that there was a good chance I was just getting my money back.
Okay. So it's a perfect line.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, we will sign off for a great season, and we want to thank all of the listeners for supporting Sports Info Solutions, supporting Football Outsiders, and listening to the Off the Charts podcast all years. If you're interested in a Sports Info Solutions Data Hub subscription for NFL or college football data, you can send us a DM at sportsinfo_SIS. The premium charting data and the weekly projections. Obviously, the projections won't be back until the beginning of next year, but you can sign up for 1 year and you will be in for a year from that date. It does not expire at the end of the season. So if you're looking for some good off-season statistics for whatever you do, you can get that from Football Outsiders. And otherwise, we'll chime in from time to time in the off season. And in the meantime, you can catch Aaron at FO_A Schatz and Football Outsiders at FB Outsiders. And you can find Sports Info Solutions at sportsinfo_SIS. And my personal Twitter is at Matt Mano, MATTMANO. Enjoy the game this Sunday.